Today, we're talking about Asia's only great ape, the orangutan. In the Malay language, its name literally means man of the forest. And that's a pretty fitting title because, as we're about to see, their entire fate is tied to the forests they call home.
You've definitely seen this face before, right? It's iconic. But here's something you might not know. The story of the orangutan isn't about just one animal. It's actually a tale of two completely different apes living on two separate islands and, unfortunately, facing two very different futures.
Okay, so the first thing you have to get is that the orangutans you find on the island of Borneo and the ones on the island of Sumatra, they're not the same. Not at all. We're talking about two distinct species here, separated by the sea for at least 10,000 years.
And this is where that distinction becomes absolutely critical. In Sumatra, you have Pongo abeli, and its status is critically endangered. That's just one step from being extinct in the wild. Then on Borneo, you've got Pongo pygmaeus, which is listed as endangered. Now, both are in serious trouble, but their situations aren't identical, and that tells you a lot about the unique pressures each one is facing.
So take a look. Here they are, side by side. On the left, we've got the Sumatran species, and on the right, the Bornean. These aren't just two animals. They're the faces of two totally separate evolutionary paths, and the dangers they're up against are just as unique.
So, why does all this matter so much? Why should we care that there are two species and that they're both in danger? Well, because these animals are so much more than just, well, animals. They are, quite literally, the gardeners of the rainforest. They're essential engineers of their entire ecosystem.
It really all comes down to their diet. Orangutans are what we call frugivores, which is just a fancy way of saying they eat a ton of fruit. And as they move through the forest, they're constantly spreading seeds from more than 1,000 different kinds of plants in their droppings. This is absolutely essential for keeping the forest alive and growing.
And I want you to just think about that for a second. If the orangutans disappear, it's not like it happens in a vacuum. It sets off a domino effect. Entire species of plants that depend on them, poof, they could vanish too. It would completely unravel the fabric of the rainforest.
And that brings us to the main event, the central conflict here. The biggest threat to the orangutan is a head-on collision between their forest homes and the non-stop expansion of one single global industry, palm oil. And look, there's no debating this. The research is crystal clear. The #1 driver of habitat loss, the main reason these animals are losing their homes, is the clearing of forests to create oil palm plantations. That's it. That's the front line of this whole conflict. This number right here really puts it all into perspective. A whopping 90% of all the world's orangutans live in Indonesia. And guess what? Indonesia also happens to be the world's biggest producer of palm oil. So the very heart of their habitat is also ground zero for the industry.
And this next number, it's just devastating. Studies show that when a forest is converted into a palm oil plantation, it can support, at best, only 20% of the mammals, reptiles, and birds that used to live there. And at worst, 0%. The biodiversity is just gone. And this is what that looks like in the real world. A displaced orangutan forced to travel across a barren landscape where its home once stood. This is the tragic result of that habitat conversion, an animal literally left stranded with nowhere left to go. So now let's zoom in on the island of Borneo, just to see what this kind of pressure really does to an entire species' home. What you're looking at here is a map of Borneo. And those colored areas show where the orangutans still live. But you notice how they aren't one big, solid block of land? They're broken up into these small, isolated pockets. This is called habitat fragmentation, and it's incredibly dangerous because it traps populations and leaves them totally vulnerable.
In fact, this fragmentation is so severe that scientists now recognize 3 distinct subspecies of orangutan just on Borneo, and each one is stuck in its own shrinking territory. You can see them here, one in the northwest, one in the southwest, and another in the east. They're basically being divided and conquered by the loss of their home. So as we start to wrap this up, it forces you to think about the bigger picture. This conflict isn't just happening in some faraway rainforest. No, it's directly connected to a global system of supply and demand that we're all a part of.
You see, the worldwide demand for palm oil, an ingredient that's in, well, almost everything we buy, is what's driving all this destruction. So it really forces us to ask a tough question. What is the true cost of the things we consume? Ultimately, the entire future of the man of the forest comes down to the survival of its young. And get this, a female orangutan gives birth only once every 6 to 9 years. That's the longest time between births of any land mammal on Earth.
It means every single infant is beyond precious. And whether they survive, well, that depends entirely on the choices that all of us make next.